welcome everybody. I'm Freddie Quek. I'm chair of the BCS Digital Divide Specialist Group. This is the first event of the year. We run a series of monthly webinars covering all ranges of topics, all relating to digital divide, digital inclusion, with technology as an enabler, as a solution provider, because we are representing the BCS here, which is the IT professional body for IT professionals, and its mission is to make IT good for society. And the SG that many of us here are represented, we set up the SG because we want to help to make sure that no one gets left behind. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Maria, which is the organizer for this event. Maria, thank you very much for putting this together. Over to you.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Maria Xiao. I'm the secretary of the Digital Divide Specialist Group and a member of the BCS. So our main first event of the year is about the new digital divide. So what AI is creating as a divide. And we know that AI is going to be changing everything in society. It's actually creating, with AI, we don't know who's going to get ahead, who gets left behind. And I think it's a big challenge, right? So we have two fantastic guests tonight, B Small and Justin Tan, who are going to be sharing their experiences across a lot of sectors and a lot of clients implementing AI strategies and solutions. So they both kind of span a lot of multinationals and nonprofits, big and small, and some of them have a banking background, some of them have a pharma industry background. So it's going to be a fantastic event today. Well, I wanted to give a big thank you to the BCS London groups who actually promoted this event as well. So Dalim, Kitty, I think Dave is also on the call. So thank you so much for promoting the event because obviously you're a big group and you gave us a lot of visibility. So for your information, I think we had something like close to 200 registrants to the event. So let me, with no further ado, let me introduce our panel today. So we have, you see on the screen, we have B Small. She's a passionate advocate of the role that AI can play in a fairer, more inclusive society. She's the co-founder of Project Alex, which is a B2B SaaS solution that helps organizations provide meaningful support to their customers through accessible AI tools. So she works with several trusts. So for example, the Peabody Trust, which is one of the UK largest landlords, and NM Trust, a disability charity. B has a fantastic background in financial services at Barclays, Confused.com, and Admiral Group. And she then turned to technology. So the role of technology impacting social issues. And she's also the non-executive director of Harcourt Community Housing Association and the co-founder of a Web3, Salamander, a Web3 investment fund. And then we have also on the screen Justin Tan. He's the managing director of Evolution Consulting. And they specialize in organizational AI strategy, upskilling, and transformation. So they're running AI literacy and proficiency training for businesses, helping both team members and senior executives understand the practical applications of and strategic implications of AI technologies. But he obviously is always championing a people-first approach to AI adoption. So both the technical capabilities, but also the mindset shifts needed to preserve human agency in the decision-making. So Justin has worked across a number of sectors, financial services, healthcare, and consulting. And he's also a visiting lecturer at UCL's Global Business School of Health and is co-lecturing a master's course on digital health and AI. So so the pharmaceutical companies he worked at was Merck and Bupa, and then worked at Kearney on digital transformation. One thing that I have to say that I didn't know ahead of time is that both B and Justin are proud graduates of INSEAD MBA, and I didn't know that, so we have also an INSEAD panel tonight. So I'm going to start the panel by asking you, B, first, and then Justin, to give us a quick sort of 2-3 minute introduction to yourself and how you ended up in this area of digital inclusion, digital divide, and AI. B, can you start?
Sure. Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yeah, so I run a company called Project Alex, and since the outset, we have been interested in how AI can be used to help those who are most vulnerable in society. A big factor in choosing to address that as an issue was some data released by the FCA in early 2023, which showed the scale of financial challenge that people were facing, which links obviously very closely to mental health and vulnerability more broadly. So there were 72% of people who were struggling to pay bills out of their income and drawing on savings to do that. So somebody who runs a technology company, you're always looking for big problems. And I would argue now that the problem of people being left behind or struggling with really day-to-day life, much of which is digital now, is a very large problem. And so our work has focused quite closely on using AI to be as inclusive as possible and address some of the barriers that exclude people from digital tools.
Justin?
So for me, I've worked a lot in the healthcare sector, the pharmaceutical sector, and my experience there has always been that there's a huge amount of inequality across society. But the digital divide is one of those areas that's actually not as noticed by other people, but can have a really huge impact on how you access like life-saving services, for instance. And I've noticed actually a big trend in general towards, I've worked in health tech as well. One thing I didn't mention to Maria, one thing I've mentioned in the health tech sector is that a lot of people develop products with the base assumption that people have access to the internet, the smartphone, and things like that. And even some healthcare providers work on the basis that this is the basis of how we interact with our patients. And I think it's a grossly well, arrogant assumption in some way, and it's quite damaging. And I've seen personally instances of people coming to a clinic not being able to access just because they don't know how to use the internet, they don't know how to access a smartphone, or just don't have it, or because they don't even have a laptop at home. And it's this kind of things when you see it suddenly on a sort of individual person basis that makes you a lot more aware. And one of the things that I do in sort of the course that I run is make people very aware that in product development, you really have to think not just about the average person, but think about outliers. And a big outlier is people who don't have digital access.
Great. So thanks for the intro. So let me dive right into an issue and a thing that you probably are very familiar with because you talk to many people across organizations. So when you talk to senior leaders or executives, and then to the employees in the same organization, do you see a difference on what they think about AI?
Do you want one of us to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Justin, this time.
Yes, sure. Okay. Definitely. There are definitely clear differences across different levels of the organization. And I speak from experience, which may not be the same for everyone. And it's a caveat, again, obviously, that some of this will be a bit sweeping, but I think there are some patterns that they're observable for people to see. So one is that certainly senior leaders in many organizations, when you think about AI, a lot of them are either they tend to be quite focused on cost efficiency. If they are interested in AI, it tends to be from a cost efficiency lens, right? This view is completely valid, but I think also it doesn't strictly answer your point, but I think it can be a bit short-sighted sometimes, right? Because I think AI's true potential lies in its ability not just on sort of change this process or that, but it's really to drive innovation and enable new business models. So I do encourage like senior leaders to take a more far-sighted view. The other thing that they do worry about obviously is compliance, data security, and all of those kind of things. And it is quite a big thing that keeps a lot of like boards and and senior leaders awake, right? They have to balance that sort of potential of technology with the fear that that your data will leak, for example. Employees, I think they tend to see AI a lot more practically. Many very happy with when they do use AI, that it does reduce their repetitive tasks, makes their life easier. But there is a palpable anxiety on the ground as well. It's not always apparent from everyone, but it's definitely there, because I just did a training recently for executive assistants, for example, and you contrast that with like a different group that I did before, who were like frontline employees. There was a noticeable like fear in them, and it took a lot of effort, I would say, right, and sort of like mindset change and just sort of like creating a psychological safety before they were comfortable to interact with technology, even, and that was. I knew it already, and I expected that, right? But it takes a lot of effort, and companies need to put that effort in. I would say even in high-paying jobs, I've worked with like bankers, consultants, and stuff like that. Even they, especially at the junior end, are uneasy about where their career trajectories will go. And I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I want to make one more point about middle management. Is very interesting. It's very nuanced for middle management. Some see AI as a way of like, I can be more strategic, right? I don't have to be in the day-to-day details, because I can focus on like people development, capability building. But the flip side is that a lot of people see middle management as that area where AI can strip off a lot of like those coordination type of tasks. And in tech firms, I'm starting to see like a slowdown in some middle management hiring. I don't know if they see that as like a layer that they can strip out, right? Because junior people can do more with AI. That's their thought. I think it's a huge mistake if that goes ahead fully, because like middle managers are like the glue in an organization, right? They bring a lot of intangible cultural mentorship value to an organization that just kind of holds it together over the long term. Anyway, so that's just what I'm seeing.
B, what about you? Kind of any difference between kind of the top level executives and the frontline employees?
Yes, certainly. There's a big difference. I mean, senior leaders are often looking at the kind of strategic picture and thinking, yes, about cost efficiency, but also what are their competitors doing and what might that mean for them? And also how might services be reimagined? And that's where it connects more to the kind of service leaders within organizations who have the very deep expertise about how a service is actually delivered, where the nuances and all the really important factors that feed into how a process would be automated and how it might be reimagined. So I see the role for leaders to be a lot about setting the tone within an organization in terms of thinking about how AI is very important to the future, but they often don't have the kind of detailed understanding of how services are delivered and the various risk considerations to actually design those systems. And that often comes down to either frontline employees or kind of service leaders of those who actually deliver the service which organizations run. And there the feeling is very mixed. I see people who are extremely excited about being able to do much more in different ways, and also some fear of particularly among older people who might be quite comfortable in a particular role and quite frightened to see that either their role will change very dramatically or could even be eliminated is kind of the fear that I see. So there's a lot of hand-holding and indeed psychological safety that has to be created in order to work with these people to deliver the new version of a service offering.
Sorry, just go ahead.
No, I was just going to build on B's point. It's very interesting. I work in organizations now, and there is that element of some device that B mentioned. One of the things that is like, for example, a generational divide, which is definitely apparent, right? With younger people sort of being digitally more savvy, we pick up AI a lot more quickly. You would have thought that is the main divide in some places, but actually, I am encouraged that I am seeing people like in their 40s, 50s, 60s actually being quite enthusiastic about AI once they learn about its potential. So that has got to be quite encouraged. The one that has a little bit more of a question mark for me is that there is I've noticed myself, and also from a few research papers that I've read, that there is quite a big divide between male and female uptake of AI. And females from the studies seem to have a higher reluctance to engage with AI and to use it. And that for me is quite an interesting divide that is maybe not there with other digital technologies and one to think about.
Yeah, very interesting as a female.
And I'm happy to say that the organizations we work with, there are lots of women who are driving the AI initiative. So there might be some stats pointing the other way, but that's certainly not my
We need to
experience.
talk to each other. I have a corollary question. So, and for a lot of technologies, the adoption is actually been sort of coming from consumer into business, right? And so when you talk to people kind of across the organizations, do you see that effect as well? As in, are they using Gen AI or other AI type tools in their kind of personal lives, and then kind of that helps bring it into the business, or is it kind of the other way around with AI?
Yeah, well, I see a lot of people who've played around with ChatGPT, although interestingly, I went to a webinar this week, which was about using ChatGPT, and lots of people who were in a webinar about using AI hadn't even played around with ChatGPT. So there's lots of people who are perhaps afraid to use the tools, but certainly I see, and again, this can be at all levels of an organization, someone who's playing around with the tool because AI is on everybody's lips at the moment, and then rethinking how that can apply to their day-to-day work life.
I steal this point from a professor at MIT, and he calls some people in organizations secret cyborgs. These are the people who, like, in many organizations, like secretly beavering away, like using AI and becoming super skilled in all aspects of it. And I think these are the people who have the potential to sort of bring their experience outside of professional life into it. And I assure you, every organization has secret cyborgs, because as I work with more organizations, I uncover them. Some of them are just like afraid to come out because they don't know if management will approve from them. So I think a big part is, if you want people to like bring, and no doubt about it, the consumer side is more advanced in many ways than the enterprise side. And I think it's almost like a laptop, right? Your consumer laptop is most of the time, sometimes I'd say better than your professional laptop, certainly in the last like 20 years or so. So if you want people to bring that learning over, you have to create the right environment for them to feel comfortable, to bring that where the culture is not permissive enough. Like, people just do not come out and talk about their use of AI at all in an organization. That's how I feel anyway.
Okay. So let's move on. I'm actually quite glad, because James on the chat actually is asking the question that I was going to ask next, right? So James' question is, do you feel AI is helping or hindering the digital divide? And my question was going to be, do you think AI can be leveraged to reduce the digital divide? And some examples. So I guess, is it helping, not helping, and how could it help? And how can we share some examples of where that's been the case?
Yeah, so our work focuses a lot on using AI tools to address some drivers of digital exclusion. So some examples of that are that we can offer translation tools very widely for a large number of languages. So that's powered by AI and means that people who have English as a second language are able to access various services. And also in our co-design work with low digital skill users, which we have done a lot of, there's lots of people who just simply aren't that confident writing in English, so who might prefer to leave a voice note or simply speak into a system rather than having to worry about grammar and spelling. And equally, dyslexia is very widespread. So there are lots of ways in which AI tools can be used to make communications much more accessible. I think, as Justin said earlier on, sometimes the senior executives within organizations who are envisioning how a service is deployed imagine that everyone is a sophisticated user of technology as they are, and perhaps the people who surround them at work. But the reality is very different. You know, even in terms of people having an email address to log into a system, remembering their password, that's a challenge for lots of people. So we use WhatsApp quite heavily, which is a tool that people with even quite basic mobile phones are able to use. They usually have it already, so they don't have to download an additional app. And these might all seem kind of individually quite small things, but collectively there's a lot of people who are impacted by not being able to access traditional digital services, and AI makes it so much cheaper and easier for organizations to meet those people's needs.
Thank you for that, B. There were two sides to the question, so I'll answer the flip side of it first. So I think AI definitely can introduce more divides. It has the potential for that. And that AI literacy component is a massive thing. If we don't get literacy out there, I think to people who need them, that's going to introduce a new form of digital divide for sure. Then the one that's more worrying for me and more insidious is deployment, and certainly around issues of bias and fairness, right? So algorithmic bias can amplify social inequalities. I was reading a study the other day about the use of during COVID-19. And US prisons were using an algorithm to understand whether they should let people go out of the prison during COVID-19 because it was not safe to keep everyone together. They were using an algorithm for calculating recidivism. So that's the chance that someone will, recommit a crime, right? And they were using that algorithm to say, should we let someone go home? But that algorithm itself was biased to begin with, right? Because against people of color and stuff like that. And then they were then using it for healthcare in the healthcare space. So it was doubling up on the bias in one area and then using it and amplifying it in another area. And the impact can be huge, right? And then you look at data asymmetry as well. All of most of the modern models these days have been trained on US, Chinese, maybe European data, but where's the rest of the world in that, right? So that has a huge impact as well on potentially on inequality. But the flip side is, I work in the AI space. I believe it's a hugely powerful tool. That it's just a tool, right? It can be good or it can be bad. I agree with you all what you said about accessibility, communication. I think specifically multimodal AI with the generative form, I really like ChatGPT introducing that toll-free number in the US where you can call ChatGPT and just talk to it, right? You don't have to use an app, right? The big one for me is education, again, right? Because I work in this space as well. If you're interested, check out this World Bank study released just late last year in Nigeria. Super interesting. They used Copilot for 6 weeks with some students in Nigeria, and it was a really controlled test, and they found that there was within 6 weeks they did the equivalent of 2 years of educational learning, which is like a massive result. So go check that out. And then obviously I can give you examples in healthcare and economic inclusion as well, where AI plays a role. So for me, it's both good and bad, and it's how we are intentional or not in using it.
Okay. So a question for B in terms of because Justin just mentioned education sort of training. How does obviously you work a lot with sort of the public sector, sort of local authorities, housing authorities. How are they going about training their frontline staff? Because I mean this is probably very different. I mean some of these things are very different from the usual way that they were doing casework or whatever. Was there any particular challenge that you guys have to deal with?
So the way that we work is very much a kind of co-design approach with the experts who are delivering the service. So there's a combination of kind of education. It's very powerful to simply show people examples of how this can work and help them to reimagine how their service would happen. And that normally happens over a period of time. So perhaps the education is part of the conversation with the organization at the start. And then there's a piece of education which is about testing and learning. I mean, one of the things I think with these tools is that we can end up thinking conceptually about the opportunities and the challenges, but the reality is that many of these only come to the surface or are really understood in the application of it. So the way that we've worked is we'll create a minimum viable product, a kind of prototype really of how the AI will work within the service, and then work with the service user to improve it. So the education happens, we're learning about the service in order to help deliver the tool, and they're learning about the tools and the potential there to understand how that should be applied within their organization. So the education for us happens through hand-holding. And we also find that within organizations, there's often a lot of interest in these sorts of projects. So we'll often do kind of lunch and learns for anybody within the organization who just wants to have a look at it, raise any concerns that they have, you know, discuss their own ideas about how things should be applied. And I think one of the things about AI being discussed so widely is that people do have a lot of questions and opinions that they need to discuss and feel reassured about.
Yeah. So do you think that as you do, so you're basically working in sort of co-creation, and therefore the adoption is basically automatic because you're doing it together. Do you think that it takes a particular kind of organization to do that? Because obviously not every organization is gonna let their teams design their own thing, right? I mean, so what do you think is the key cultural the key culture feature that has to exist in an organization to be able to let basically be very democratic in terms of like they letting their own people design their own processes and incorporate the AI in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've been lucky enough as an organization to find some kind of senior leaders who have a sense of vision about what they would like for their organization. They want to harness these tools. And you're right, a sense of trust in their service leaders, or belief in them that they're the right people to manage it. And I just published an article on LinkedIn today because I think that the people side of an organization is very much underestimated in these conversations about how technology can be used to improve services, because you must have you know, the leader who can kind of champion it and also sponsor these initiatives so that the change itself is valuable, is seen as valuable within the organization, but also the kind of experts who can work with the technologists to make sure that the change is actually delivering what's needed. And you have to have both parts. So it's those leaders have to be able to trust their service users to be part of the co-design process in order to end up with the right result.
Justin, do you have any comment on this in terms of kind of how culture and organizations may or may not affect?
I fully agree with all that. The one nuance that I'd add to that is it kind of depends on the industry as well. Because I used to work in I still work in a very regulated industry. So healthcare is that, and pharmaceuticals as well. And when I first started in the pharmaceutical industry, I was like, oh, it's slow. It's not moving, but it is that by design, because it is regulated. You know, things need to be very, very robust. And at that point in time, when I was at Merck in an innovation role, and we introduced like, you know, agile teams and stuff like that, it's a lot more easy to do it for, let's say, maybe the commercial function, let's say. But in some of the functions, you can't introduce that kind of like way of working, because it has to be sort of very process driven and robust in the way you approach it. So yes, I agree with all of that, but I think it also depends sort of on the industry, and certainly in some parts of the functions where you can't adopt that approach.
So could you comment on that just very quickly, just in kind of some of the regulated industry? I mean, maybe you also have ideas about that. Like in very regulated industries, do you think this is, obviously there'll be a question of regulation, but do you think that means that it's going to be much longer in certain industries, or is it
I feel it will always be like for example, in consumer, for example, right? Like these guys are always very quick in getting like products out. It's very easy to test, very easy to iterate. You get your answers back. In healthcare, you know, you have to be very cautious with what you do, because people's lives are at stake, right? So yes, I think innovation is always going to be a little bit slower in the regulated industries, but I think it's something we have to accept, right? Innovation for the sake of innovation is not the right thing to do, to be honest.
Yeah. So I think, well, I had another question, but I think you sort of answered it before, because I was thinking about, like, how do I mean, if you want to add something about this, how do we make sure that AI remains accessible to marginalized or underserved groups? I mean, sort of outside of businesses in the public sector. Do you have any examples of making? I mean, B, you already gave a couple, but I mean, do you have any more examples of how to make sure that people with no access to, AI, whether it's actually the technology or the skills, any initiative that you know of that is specifically geared towards that? You said the lunch and learns, I remember. And do you have any other ideas that have worked?
In terms of sort of like getting AI out to underserved groups, that's what you mean? Yeah, I think it definitely has been used, and maybe as a mechanism for reducing inequality, was like in sort of let's say economic inclusion. Actually, like I know about some platforms, for example, I think in Confio is the name of one, KONFIO, in Africa, for example, where they use like AI to assess like creditworthiness, because like normally like in countries like the UK, you have a lot of data about people. It's very easy to make credit decisions, but in other countries where you don't have like traditional credit data, you have to be a lot more like innovative in the ways you think about sort of lending to people and whether they're safe or not. So that's maybe one, but maybe another point I would make about sort of like just accessibility of AI to everybody is that, just to emphasize that again, I think the product design is super important, right? If you build your product to be inclusive from the start, it's a lot more likely to work. And the point of that you made about co-creation, I think is super important, because when you release a product into a community, and that community is part of building that product, the chances of them like adopting it is so much higher. Sometimes it impacts the fact that it's more relevant for them, obviously. But the thing that most people don't get is that it's trust, because these guys were involved in like building the product. So they've seen the data that goes into it, right? They know that it's their local data, not sort of like national data or even US data. They're a lot more likely to trust it. It's tailored for their language and their culture. And so that's how you get like an AI to work for like a local community. It's not like foisting a ChatGPT on everybody, basically, I would say.
Yeah, just a couple of things really to add to that. It's such a large and complex problem, the issue of accessibility. So it's difficult to kind of answer that briefly. But one thing I'll say, just to come back to the point of regulation, is that financial services firms are required in the UK, at least, to take into account the needs of vulnerable customers. And vulnerability can include difficulty accessing digital services, or any other kind of need. It could be bereavement or job loss or any kind of life event that perhaps impacts your ability to access services and take decisions. And so I think it's important that people know that they are entitled to ask of their financial services providers to take that into account. So there's a role, I think, for kind of awareness raising of policy that's already in place to support people who might be excluded. And that increasingly extends into how products are designed and services are designed. And the more people voice their need to have their requirements met, the more organizations will design for people's needs. So I think there's a piece of kind of advocacy that needs to happen, and that regulation is being extended to the communication sector and also utilities, so telecoms and water companies, energy, etc. They will all be bound by that regulation. So all of these essential services, which everybody needs to be able to access, pay their bill, find out how much they're being charged, these really, really important services must take into account the needs of vulnerable customers and co-design how services are delivered with them, which I think is an improvement. But just the advocacy point, I think, is really, really important. And I had a second one, which I've now forgotten, but perhaps we can come back to later.
It will come back. Something came to mind that something you said sparked a thought, which is in response to your last question, Maria, was that so I'm Singaporean. I don't know if you guys can tell from my accent, but Singapore has something called like the Future Skills Credit, and every year, all Singaporeans get like, I don't know, X $1,000 or whatever it is to actually do any course that they want, which is actually really cool. So even though I don't even live in Singapore, I get the credit and can do, and they actually make the like AI courses, even AI courses now, I've seen them available for anyone to use. So actually you have a lot of like the seniors actually now doing these kind of AI courses. And I think it actually contributes to Singapore having the highest rate of AI adoption in the world, as of a survey I read last year. So I think there's an important like public-private partnership to be had there as well in terms of like, you know, making sure that AI is accessible or technology is accessible to like underserved communities.
Yeah, that's a great point, Justin. So I've remembered what I was going to say, which is about learning. I've recently started learning Python, and I'm using a system which A is really affordable because it's obviously had lots of AI in terms of how the system is being built. And I think the cost of delivering any digital service is just going down massively with AI. But the other thing is that I get incredible feedback in a few seconds on my code as I'm learning. And so, you know, I'm really experiencing how much of an enhancement to learning. Like if I'd had this when I was 10 years old, you know, I'd probably be doing incredible things, or, you know, it's just amazing how you can learn information. So there definitely is something which hasn't been solved around how adults of any age, there's an enormous opportunity to get stuck into this technology if you have the right attitude and you're open to learning, and lots of it is, you know, is online. You can access it from anywhere, so location isn't really a challenge. So there are lots and lots of opportunities, and I think it's really just about encouraging people to experiment with this technology and learn and accept the fact that it's changing all the time. So, you know, perhaps a kind of traditional education route isn't the right one for somebody who's looking to upskill like that. It's going to be much more about short courses. And I believe that the UK government has a scheme for adult learners who are looking to enhance their career and take a loan out to pay for training. So, and I think probably more initiatives like that that help people with lifelong learning to stay on top of it is going to be really important.
So Marie, do you mind if I jump in? Because that is a really, I don't want to add like dark clouds to what you just said, because I fully agree with all of that. But so I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke, B, was that I don't know if you guys have come across this. There was an example of someone on, I don't know, a forum somewhere, and she was describing her little sister using ChatGPT to do her homework. And it's 7 years ago, and she's taking her homework answers, questions, pasting them to ChatGPT, getting the answers, pasting them right back into the homework sheets. And then the only thing that she does with the answers is tell ChatGPT, make them shorter or make them longer. So she finishes all her entire homework done. She probably gets full marks on them, but she hasn't learned anything at all from the entire process. And look, I think AI has a real potential to change the educational system through like personalized learning, through, you know, the ability to kind of just like give each and individual student, every individual student, the kind of education they need, rather than the one-size-fits-all model. But we're going to have to like radically change the way we teach people and the things that we focus on in our education system, because otherwise I think we're going to end up with a young generation that just can't do the critical thinking, will not be intellectually curious, because they have AI to do everything for them. I don't know if that's overly drastic, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, anyway, just a heads up to everybody. I'm going to ask probably my last question, and so if you can get your questions ready on the chat. There's a whole bunch of us from the specialist group checking on the questions, and so get ready for your questions. And I'm going to ask a last question. So we talked a little bit about education, but other than education, lifelong learning, what can organizations do to or society do, in a more general term, to ensure we're ready and adaptable to all the changes that AI is going to bring? So any thoughts on that? You want to start?
Well, adaptable is a great word, because, you know, the reality is that none of us know where this technology is going, but it is changing very, very rapidly. So building that kind of flexibility and understanding. I know the government is kind of doing a lot now to understand and harness how AI works. But as somebody who tries to work with government on innovation, there's an enormous amount of fear about taking risk, you know, trying something. And that's what innovation is. It's a series of small risks. I think we perhaps need to learn to be better experimenters and tinkerers and people who learn by doing. And some of that for me is stepping a bit away from our kind of traditional educational paradigms, which are about doing things perfectly, very completely, and, you know, being like good education is understanding a topic in a very wide way, even if that takes a very long time, and then producing something to a very high standard. And I think being good at this technology is perhaps more akin to a playful mode of trying things out and not being too afraid of things going wrong. And of course, that means, you know, doing it in a safe context. I'm not suggesting that the organization should take risk where it doesn't make sense, but understand where you can play, have a kind of sandbox attitude, and learn and grow and learn to adapt on an ongoing basis. Maybe it was waterfall and then it's agile, and now it's kind of agile on steroids, perhaps, as an attitude.
I agree with that. I could have said it better. The one thing I would add, maybe from a societal standpoint, so education for me is the biggest thing, but next to that, I would say there's the thing that worries me most about this is the ability of AI these days to kind of like create fake news, to skew perspectives so convincingly that we cannot even tell reality from what has been artificially created anymore. And the longer we go along, the harder it will be to actually do this. And I think people at the same time, because of social media, because of like lock boxes where people don't talk to other people in society, our ability as society to discern what is true or not true and to be critical about what we see and not see has diminished, sadly. And I think as society, as leaders, as government, as policymakers, that should be one of our top priorities, right? To kind of, I don't know the solution to that, but I think it's a very, very important thing to solve, because the degree of fake news that we've seen, you know, in some of, let's say, the last political campaigns and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. It will increase exponentially from here on out. And if we don't find a way to like cap it, and Facebook Meta like deciding not to use, right, in the last few days, not to use any like fact checkers is hugely worrying for me. But then there's the flip side, what organizations can do, but then there's also what we can do as people to become more discerning. I think that's hugely important. I don't have a solution for it, but I flag a risk.